Welcome. My name is Stacey Goldring. Welcome to Chapter Endnotes. This month we are discussing The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, and I'm so glad that you're going to take a deep dive under the sea. I had to get that in there. So we can enjoy our time together. I guarantee you will, in this next hour or so, you'll learn that everything you knew about The Little Mermaid was wrong. And I'll even be able to connect Splash, the 1984 play that film that Phyllis was referencing to our story today. If we get time, this is what I'd like to get through. I don't know if we'll get to all of it. So if you hear something that's like, look, I want to talk about this before you head out for your day, let me know, and I will make sure I touch on it. I want to talk about the summary of the book, What's with Mermaids. I'm calling this What's with Mermaids, this category, a whole origin of mermaids and culture. We need to talk about the end of the story. We also need to talk about the themes, the influence, not only of this book, but of Hans Christian Andersen, going on to page 2. A biography of his very interesting life. And then if we have times, I would like to tie this into Carlsberg beer, which is very important. And also paper cuts, the art of paper cutting. So we're gonna cover a lot of things today. I don't know if you've all read the book. It's only 43 pages, but what I'd like to do is just give a brief overview. This is an illustration from one of the earlier editions. The book was published in 1837, and it was part of a collection of fairy tales. And of course, it follows the journey of a young mermaid who gives up her life at sea in order to gain an immortal soul. If I were telling the story, I would say it's about a young girl who comes from a broken home, who is raised by her overbearing father and grandmother, and they like to garden. Here's an old, not an original edition, but a beautiful older edition I found on eBay. This is 1887. Books are such artwork, you know, so stunning. There are 5 mermaid siblings, and they're all gardeners. And here we have, again, an early illustration of our mermaid hugging a statue of her prince in her garden. Very different imagery than we think of with the Little Mermaid of Disney of our time, which is emblazoned on our brain. So like the Amish rite of passage called Rumspringa, at the age of 15, the mermaids in this book are allowed to just go on a bender and go up to the ocean and do whatever they want. So one mermaid decides to becomes frightened by a small dog. Another's floating on an iceberg. Another is playing with dolphins and whales. But it is our Little Mermaid at age 15 who sees a birthday party upon a ship for a prince. And then the storm comes along and the ship sinks. She becomes what I would call a smitten good Samaritan. She delivers him unconscious to a temple on a shore where there's a temple. And then we have a case of mistaken identity, because when the prince awakes, he thinks it's one of these beautiful princesses who come out from this temple who has rescued him. There are 2 strong women in this story. They're both older women, which I love. One is the grandmother of the Little Mermaid, who when she goes to her grandma and basically says, oh my gosh, I've fallen in love with this guy, but you know, he's really not from our tribe. He walks on land, he's got 2 legs. And the grandma's like, hold it right there. We live to 300 years old, which isn't bad. And then we can become sea foam. Okay. Those people there on Earth, they don't live that long. Yeah, they do have an immortal soul, but trust me, life is better down here. She doesn't like to hear that. So then we have enter another older woman who's rather wise, and that's the Sea Witch, another beautiful illustration. This sea witch also tells it like it is, which is basically like everything has a price tag and how much you're willing to pay to make your dreams come true. Kind of like black market. And so our mermaid decides to pay with her voice. And the sea witch basically gives her some drugs after she slices out her tongue and says, basically, drink this and you'll never be able to speak again. And every time you walk, it'll be incredibly painful, but you'll have a chance for an immortal soul and you'll get your guy. So she goes ahead and she does this, and she wakes up quite naked and is found by the prince. She can't talk, she can't walk. Here's a beautiful illustration. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name of this illustrator correctly, Edmond Dulac, but he illustrated many fairy tales, and this is just a stunning illustration of her swimming up on the shore. And of course, it seems there's one common theme in all fairy tales, which is we have a lot of princes who are absolutely clueless, and so is he. And he treats her kind of like a pet. It's kind of annoying. He's mesmerized by her beauty. He's not bothered at all that this woman cannot speak, which I find kind of funny. And he likes to watch her dance, which I found kind of weird. And they become companions. Ultimately, like in many customs and many cultures, he has to abide by a planned marriage, which happens a lot in royalty as well. And he's to marry this princess who he mistakenly saw on shore and thought it was the woman who rescued him originally. So like any great book, enter a murder plot. So there's a lot in 43 pages. The sisters, out of love, also go visit the sea witch, kind of the Tony Soprano of the sea. And they, for an exchange of cutting off their beautiful locks, the sea witch gives them a knife, which they also rise to the surface in the night of the wedding. They basically tell the mermaid, look, just kill him, and then you can come back into the fold. I don't know what the lesson is supposed to be there, but nonetheless, our little mermaid cannot kill the prince. She decides to jump overboard, and she indeed dies and becomes sea foam. If you have not read the book, I'm sorry, it is not the Disney ending. But the lesson is, well, let me finish by saying she becomes a spirit, considered a daughter of the air, which originally was one of the original names of the story, not the Little Mermaid, but Daughters of the Air. And she is greeted by other mer daughters that have been in the same situation. So it's kind of a story of second chances, because she now has a second chance, not to get the guy, but to get an immortal soul, which Hans Christian Andersen argues was really the goal anyway. To get an immortal soul, she has to watches over children. And in 300 years, if they've done, I think if it stacks up, if they've done more good deeds than bad, then she is granted a soul. That's the story. Again, very different from our Disney version. So what is the deal with mermaids anyway? I guarantee you, if you walk into a TJ Maxx after we leave here today, or a Home Goods, or you look online, you could find towel racks that have little mermaid fins. You could you can go buy a mermaid sleeping bag. You can go to Wickiwachi Springs and go watch the mermaids all day long. They are so a part of our culture. So the question is, why? Well, actually, the origins of mermaids go back to 3,300 BCE, the Bronze Age. Okay. There was a lady of the sea during this time that was called Iterat, and this originated in Syria, back then known as Assyria, the lady of the sea, or the mother of the gods. This is the first time history is recording this idea of a mermaid creature. And then we hop to 1000 BCE, and we have a Targatus, which is a beautiful goddess of fertility. She casts herself into a lake and she transforms into a mermaid. Fast forward a little further, and now we're into Greek mythology. Think of sirens, which were originally actually half bird-like, but then they became to be pictured as half fish-like during the Christian era. And we have merfolk in Greek mythology. The son of Poseidon and Amphitrite was called Triton, and he is most frequently shown as a merman. We have mermen who are blowing conches while riding sea waves, etc. Even Christopher Columbus reported seeing mermaids in the Caribbean, but today we're thinking he actually maybe saw manatees. So because we are wordy people, I like to know the origins of the word. So it comes from the Old English, mer or mare, sea, and maid, a girl or woman. The equivalent term in Old English was merwith, merwife. And these are conventionally depicted as beautiful women with long flowing hair and fish torsos. But what about in Denmark? In Denmark, or in Danish, the word is havfru, which means sea wife or sea lady. Mermaid tales are considered migratory legends, which means they are groups of tales, no pun intended, found in Scandinavia, but they're also found elsewhere in the world. The mermaid is someone who will occasionally bestow bits of wisdom on people who do good deeds and earn the right to ask, kind of like the Oracle of Delphi. Here is an early oral tale that, I said it again, about Danish folklore when it comes to mermaids. A fisherman asked a mermaid what is the most suitable material for a flail, which I'm not sure what that is, but I think it's some kind of hide. And she answers calf's hide. And of course, she tells him that you asked the wrong question. You should have asked how to brew water into beer, because that would have made you more happy. So we have a mermaid that is witty with a sense of humor and is also really smart. Here you're looking at a beautiful, almost looks like a Gustav Klimt image, but this is depicting the story of Agnet and the merman, which is also from Danish culture. And the Little Mermaid has become a symbol for the country itself. I'm sure you have an image in your mind. I'll show you of the statue that is in Copenhagen. This particular mermaid here, this merman, has convinced this woman to jump into the sea and become his bride. So she jumps into the sea. They have all these children, but then she decides to come back and live as an earthling, I guess you'd call it, and walk on terra firma, leaving all her mermaid children behind. And there are sculptures in Danish folklore where they have, that you can see in Denmark, of mermaids underwater reaching up for their mother who has left them. So these are independent creatures who leave one world or one culture for another culture. Here's a man, very handsome gentleman, who we can thank for bringing mermaids into literature. His name is Paracelsus, and he believed, it's very interesting, he writes a book that's not printed till after he dies called A Book on Nymphs, Sylphs, Pygmies, Salamanders, and Other Spirits. And this is published in 1566. And this is the first time we see this word used, undine. And it appears in his alchemical writings. He was an alchemist and a physician, and unda means wave. So he believed in the world there were four elements, and this is also, a legend that's in many cultures: earth, wind, fire, and air. It's also a great band from the 70s. And each of these elemental spirits had liminal, they called limina or liminal creatures that share the world with humans, but they're not really of it. They're spiritual. So in the air, we had sylphs. In the water, we had undines or nymphs, which come to be mermaids. The earth has gnomes and pygmies. And then fire are manifest in salamanders. If we think back to beautiful texts that were written by monks and religious texts back in the day, they were illustrated with these beautiful creatures. And these were called bestial texts because there were all these different beasts that were woven into the Bible and biblical teachings. This was his philosophy. When he read the book of Genesis, he felt that man needs to use philosophy to gain knowledge about the natural world, or he will not be able to understand Christ and appreciate the Bible. And he dismissed anyone that saw these liminal creatures as devilish or evil. So he argues that they are part of God's creation and they exist and inhabit the world that we live in. We just have to make ourselves aware of them. The legacy of this very unknown man is that today, Lord of the Rings, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I mean, these popular tales of hobbits and gnomes and Snow Queen and creatures who, inhabit one world and also the other, the Little Mermaid, we can trace back to this author. This book, Undine, was a novella that was written in 1811, and Hans Christian Andersen read this story. He is aware of the stories that I've shared with you about Danish folklore that has to do with these liminal creatures, the mermaids. This book, and I'm going to cock up the title because it's German, was written by the German romantic Friedrich de la Motte Folk. Here's the story. The main character, surprisingly, is called Hans. He is a knight errant who has been sent off on a quest for his betrothed, and in the forest, he meets and falls in love with an undine or mermaid. It's described as a water sprite, and she's attracted to the world of mortal man. I won't tell you the end of the story, but it ends up as a very sad ending. The lesson being that you can't cross cultures without paying a price. Okay, so now we think to our story that we read and what happens at the end of our story. The Little Mermaid, she does not get her prince, but she does have an opportunity to get a soul. The author, P.L. Travers, who wrote Mary Poppins, was also a noted folklore commentator. He did not like the ending of Our Little Mermaid. He said the final message is more frightening than any other presented in tale. The story descends into the Victorian moral tales written for children to scare them into good behavior. Hans, this is blackmail. The ending has been considered disjointed and contrived. They felt that the story arc should have ended either with her killing the prince or her getting the prince. But this odd plot, this sudden twist ending of hope, the ambiguity, people at the time, they just didn't get it, at least in Denmark. But Hans defended it. He said, I like my ending much better than the ending in this book you see here. He wrote to friends. Scholars have those letters, which he says people don't understand. This is a much better ending because your identity, your life, and your choices should not have to depend on anyone else. It's up to you. This illustration that is from, again, a very early, this is 1837, of the Little Mermaid, shows that we see our Little Mermaid ascending with the daughters of the air, again, the original title of the book. They definitely look like angels. This is a woman who has chosen, made a self-sacrifice because she couldn't commit murder. She's not going to get the guy, but really what's important is that she can achieve a soul. She can achieve a sort of immortal existence that goes well beyond what you establish here on earth. It's a pretty deep ending, and I had to read it a few times before I understood really what was going on. This is what Hans Christian Andersen said to a friend. I have not, like mote folk in Udine, allowed the mermaid acquiring of immortal soul to depend on the love of anyone, of a human being. I won't accept this sort of thing in the world. I have permitted my mermaid to follow a more natural or divine path. Okay. Hans was never successful in love, ever. It is part of his life journey at every chapter. Wherever he tries, with whomever he tries, he fails. Ultimately, The Little Mermaid is an autobiography. So I'm going to leave it right here for now, and we can go back and talk some more, but I wanted to throw it open to you and get your response, what you thought of the book, and so on and so forth. So would anyone like to chime in and tell me, first of all, what I first want to know is, has anyone read this already before we had this as one of our, so Phyllis, you have, so go ahead and unmute.
Yeah,
so
as a kid, I came to reading Grimm's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen. And I don't know what I made of this as a kid reading this stuff. I have no idea. Okay. But I know I've read them all. But oddly, okay. I guess I remember Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates more than anything of those. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I think of this as that what I take away from it is that these women all stick together.
Oh, okay. Okay. It's so fun once we dive in, no pun intended, but you can't help it because it's everywhere in this book, to pull out relevant themes today. Yeah. This is 1837, but man, you could go to town in 100 million different ways with this. Gloria, you have a smile on your face. What did you think of Our Mermaid?
Well, I mean, number one, I love that it wasn't Disney.
Oh, that's another thing. I have oodles of info about Disney if we have time to get there.
You know, I love the seriousness of the immortal soul, and I love the ending, and the twists. And I doubt I've ever seen The Little Mermaid except for, scenes of certain songs. But I certainly didn't remember. I knew she had to sacrifice her voice, but I didn't know that every step was incredibly painful. It's just so much deeper and darker than Disney. But that little twist at the end, when these daughters of the air see a naughty child, it adds to their time. And when they see a good child, like that little bit of blackmail in case it actually was being used as a fairy tale for children, was an interesting little twist.
It certainly, and as a mother, I can just, I read that, I'm like, oh, great. Like you can't, it never ends. Like even
Elf on the Shelf.
Yeah. Lucy, why don't you unmute, and you and your oyster cup beauty, please do tell us what you thought of the book.
I had to read the ending like 5 times. I was confused.
Yep.
Because when she throws the knife away overboard, it's got blood on it. So what does that mean?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Maybe it started. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back.
Y'all remember that? Let me see if I can find it. And I was so confused, like, well, she use the knife? She didn't use the knife?
All right. Well, who knows, because we all have different versions. So we're all going to remember it's translated. So I don't know if my book has blood on the knife, or, you know, you have a hardback. Someone may have read it online. There's a bazillion different versions. So let's see. It's a great question. I don't know. While you're looking for that, Elise, I see you're unmuted, and because I've known you for 150 years, I don't feel bad calling you out on it and asking you.
Hi, I'm in my car. So that's why I was.
That's not a problem. I have a friend who does podcasts from her closet in her bedroom. So it's all good.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's all good.
All right.
All right. So for me, like you, Stacey, as a mother of sons, I don't know this about you, but not a huge movie lover. I've never seen The Little Mermaid, the Disney version, and I don't know how it ended. Knife, no knife, blood, no blood. I'm sure they all lived happily ever after. But I thought I loved reading the tale, and I guess I thought it was a morality tale.
100%. It was written for adults, P.S.
I hadn't thought about it as an autobiography, but I think that's brilliant, because ultimately I think everybody writes autobiographies because you write what you know. But I'm so curious as to why it's such a big deal that there's a statue in Copenhagen. And I don't know. I love the way it was written. So there you go. Lay it on me.
All right. Well, I will let you know. And it's very apropos, Elise, that you ask that question, because I'm going to tie it into beer. Just saying. It's very interesting. We'll get to that. So hang tight, because we're going to.
I found it.
Okay, Lucy.
And the knife trembled in the hand of the little mermaid. Then she flung it far away from her into the waves. The water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. So was it not blood? She cast one more lingering, half-fainted glass at the prince, and then threw herself from the ship into the sea, and thought her body was dissolving into foam. So I didn't understand if it was blood, if it wasn't blood. I was confused.
That's interesting. I don't know. I see where it is. She pulls us a red dom.
I kept reading it over and over, trying to understand. But it reminds me of, like, my mother was from Italy, and her fairy tales were so different and gruesome and different from our, Americanized fairy tales. I mean, what the witches did and stuff. It was some black
Stregonona.
Right. I mean, it was scary stuff.
They're made to scare children. I thought that was sort of the folklore point of fairy tales.
When fairy tales evolve and they become, let's call it Victorian, so there's a whole German culture of fairy tales, and there's a Victorian culture of fairy tales, and depending on how they're translated and interpreted through that culture, they will take on whether it's scary or teaching a lesson or threatening. In the case of the Mary Poppins author criticizing this book, he is saying you Victorianized it, by saying, kids, if you don't behave like Santa Claus, you're going to get coal in your stuff. So I think it depends on the time and the place they were interpreted. The takeaway from our discussion today should be that there's no really news stories out there. They're interpretations of tales of tales of tales. We're going back to Assyria and 3000 BCE, where the mermaid creature first shows up, interpreted over time. So I think it depends on the culture in which it was written, and then it depends on the translator. There's just so much writing on it. But if you think if anyone has, I do not have daughters, but daughters or granddaughters who want to be these princesses, want to dress up in these costumes and, be Ariel or whoever it is, we actually have this guy who is I talk about the guy from the 1500s whose name I can't even pronounce, but it's this guy who was that influencer. That's the strong influence he has had that Disney can thank for that. And like I said, we're going to get to Disney, the pros and the cons of Disney. And if you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, the philosopher Malcolm Gladwell, he also talks about the Disney film a lot, and we'll get there too. So a lot to cover. So I hope that your fins are well situated in your oyster shell, because we got a lot to do. Okay.
You've left out one very important mermaid.
And that is?
Bette Midler.
Bette Midler. I don't remember her being, oh, that's right.
Oh, dear God.
Oh my God.
I had the great pleasure of seeing her at Radio City in that stage show where she was a mermaid. Holy God.
Well, first of all, Phyllis, you are the Forrest Gump of things happening in New York City. When the people like leaving bombs on Park Avenue by steps from your, I mean, there's a story there. You're going to need to speak to my cinematographer. There's a lot here to divulge. Okay. I'm just saying. Okay. Okay. I see Elizabeth is unmuted. If you want to pop in, Elizabeth, and tell us at all what you thought of Little Mermaid before.
Yeah. Just a second, if you can hear me. My kids were growing up when Little Mermaid came out, the movie through Disney. So it was very challenging for me to read the story and try and differentiate it from Little Mermaid, the movie.
Because it's so burnt on your brain?
Yeah, so I'm very interested to hear your Disney background. So perhaps it's a great segue.
Okay, and yeah, I will definitely go to that. And what I will now burn on your brain, I'm telling you right now, if you're listening and if you're looking, there's no unlooking. So when we move forward, I'm just fair warning, there's no unlooking, okay? Just know, like, if you have any, and then I know some of you will actually enjoy and get quite a hoot of what I'm about to share. This is the cover that Elizabeth probably had, and I certainly had in my home, because of course we had Little Mermaid. This is the cover of the Little Mermaid that was on the DVD, the Disney DVD. And I'm just going to cut to the quick and work backwards, because I know people have places to go and things to do. There was a lawsuit about this cover because, okay, you're looking at it. There was a lawsuit because someone in Arkansas felt that there was a in the castle.
Oh, good Lord.
Okay, so now you can't unlook. You have to see it, because there it is. Okay.
Where?
So that when this cover came out, there was a lot of controversy because, you know, subliminal images and all that ridiculousness. So not only this cover was an issue that Disney was somehow poisoning your children.
You mean that?
Look, I don't need to be slammed with the lawsuit. Just nip it in the butt over there. All right. But there is also another scene that happens in the movie, Elizabeth, that you may remember that certainly is not in this, in the real tale, where there is a clergyman who is marrying Ariel and Prince Eric, and evidently he looks really excited about it. But the animators at Disney and Disney came out saying, no, that is not the little clergyman being excited. It is his knobby knee. This is what
I see what you're saying. Oh God.
This is what people spend their time on. Okay. You know, no one wants to, anyway, moving forward. Okay. This is that beautiful sculpture that I believe Gloria is going to Copenhagen soon. I think.
Hopefully.
Yeah, so please take a picture of yourself near this beautiful lady and send it to us. And I have some history on that as well. We'll come back to that. I want to get to Disney.
You look so sad.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Save that. Some very fun facts about Disney. First of all, I want to talk to you about Ursula, who was inspired. Ursula was inspired by Divine, if you remember Divine, who was really ahead of her time. I'm so sad she did not live to see this. And also Joan Collins as Alex Carrington on Dynasty. The first choice for the voice of Little Mermaid, Gloria, you realize now you're going to have to watch this. Okay, you're going to have to do it. Was B. Arthur, who turned it down. Others were considered. Yeah, Beef Maud. Also, Roseanne and Jennifer Saunders and Elaine Stritch were also considered for the role.
You don't mean to play the Little Mermaid. You mean
no,
to play
Ursula.
Which is totally the best role. I would love to be Ursula. But ultimately was given to Pat Carroll. Jim Carrey auditioned for Prince Eric, and Scuttle the Fish was Bill Maher and Scuttle the Seagull, I believe, was Bill Maher and also Michael Richards, Kramer. But ultimately it went to Buddy Hackett.
He's so funny.
Yeah, very funny. Okay, so I thought that would be interesting to know. All right, now going back to the history of Disney. Little Mermaid, I'll just let you look at that for a bit. Little Mermaid was originally a concept that came to mind at Disney right after the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This is the late 1930s. They began development. It was going to be a series of Disney vignettes that were all of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. For some reason, it was shelved and delayed into the 1980s. Fast forward to 1984, and Disney, they came back and said, we'd like to try this again. And Disney at first passed because they were going to do an animated version of Splash with Daryl Hannah and Mrs. Stimler and Tom Hanks. However, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who I believe was the head of Disney at the time, I think that's who it was, he approved the go-ahead. So they go to begin development, and lo and behold, they find creative notes from the 1930s on choices they'd have to make between this version and the version we see here. And Disney made the same creative decisions in production then that they made in the 1930s. So what were those? Well, they eliminate the grandmother. So again, older women not having big parts in films. A story for another time.
Unless they're a witch.
Yeah. They also decide that instead of having a crab be an English butler, they will have a crab as kind of a sidekick, but he will be Sebastian and he will be Jamaican. They also decide to adopt a Broadway style storytelling. So what I mean by that is, okay, I can't stand musicals because I just want to know the story. Don't stop and start singing to me because that's really annoying. Like, I'm probably the only person who could not stand Les Mis. It's like, are we ever going to like talk to one another? But anyway, in this case, it will be storytelling, a narrative told through story, song, and then a big finale. This had not been done before. And they bring in Howard Ashman. If you're into, movies, you may know that name, because he did the score for Little Shop of Horrors. So he is the one who starts to bring in these huge songs that end up becoming, they win Grammys. So one song is called Part of Your World that was nearly cut because it tested poorly with kids who were becoming bored and rowdy during that scene when they were testing it. A similar situation actually happened, if you remember, in The Wizard of Oz Over the Rainbow. When they first tested that, they almost cut it because the kids were bored. But in most cases, they decided to do another trial, and the kids liked it. So both of those songs were kept in. I just love these little bits of trivia. This film was also released almost in concert with the release of the video. This had not yet been done before. This was a big change in how film and VHS were done. It was a leap of faith, and man, it worked, because in my latest research, over $1 billion has been made on this story. This was first considered wait for it, a girl film. And therefore, they thought it was going to make less money at the box office. However, by the time it was ready for production, they decided to, ready to be distributed, they decided to put more money behind it. Jeffrey Katzenberg believed in the power of the story with introducing this Broadway style storytelling to the script. And then it just won Academy Awards, blah, 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 whatever. So this legacy is that this is the first animated fairy tale since Sleeping Beauty that came out in 1959. Yes, they were songs, but it didn't have that Broadway structure. It's a historically important film because it reestablished feature-length animation being profitable for Disney. Up to this point, 1989, how did Disney make their money? It was not in film. It was in theme parks, TV shows, etc. So now we see that all those things are now fueled by their film. This is a story that has now had sequels and prequels. You know, you can go to Ariel's grotto at Disney World and wait in line to meet Ariel. Of course, like everything in this world, in 2023, they are going to do a re-release. And in this new version, Ariel will have more power at the end of this story. Okay, I want to talk about the philosopher Malcolm Gladwell. If you've read Freakonomics or The Breaking Point, you'll be familiar with this guy. He's absolutely brilliant. And I want to get back to the real story, so I'm going to give you the shortened version. If you want to hear more, I'm going to be at the bookstore next week, and I will, because people will be embarrassed just to get up and walk out on me, so I'll tell the whole thing. But basically, he spoke to a neuroscientist, a lawyer, and a screenwriter. And they talked about what was wrong with this version of Little Mermaid. The lawyer could not stand this film because Ariel is bound by a written contract that even her father, who is a king, cannot break. They can't negotiate the contract for a better outcome. So in the end, in this film, the animated, they actually have to kill Ursula in order for Ariel to marry the prince and for everyone to have a happy ending. So in order to, the triumph of good versus evil in this case is to actually murder, which did not go over well with the lawyer. The neuroscientist had something interesting to say. The screenwriter wrote a completely different ending for the Little Mermaid, in which the Little Mermaid does not marry the prince, but she ends up a very independent woman. And we find out that the Mer King and Ursula actually had a very bad breakup years and years ago, and they reemerge and they end up getting married in the end, having like a 2.0 second chances and all that. And every single other issue that you can think of today culturally is represented in the wedding and the wedding party. Everyone is represented. It is so dumb because it's just like, can't leave anyone out, that it makes for a very convoluted, dare I say, watered down ending. So I'll really be glad when we're beyond all this, but right now we're just in the thick of it. So I'm just going to end this discussion of Disney and get back to Hans Christian Andersen, because he is absolutely a fascinating guy. And here he is. Here's our man. This is Hans Christian Andersen. He wrote 150.
Dickens.
Very much so. In fact, I have a Dickens story to tell you. Dickens ghosted Hans Christian Andersen.
Really?
Now that I know what that term means, I think it's pretty funny. Okay, so he wrote 156 stories in 9 volumes. His books are translated into more than 125 languages. His stories have never been out of print. That's kind of like the Bible. That's pretty good, okay? He was born in 1805, dirt poor, small town Odense, Denmark. Lived with his grandma, who cherished him and told him stories of myths that were handed down through Danish folklore. She also combined personal family experiences. If you're familiar with the tale, The Little Match Girl, this is the story of Hans's mother's childhood. And if you're familiar with The Ugly Duckling, he molded this also from his own childhood experiences. His mother was illiterate. She took in laundry. His father was a poor cobbler, also named Hans, but he always believed that they actually had noble blood in them, and he felt he was born of a higher class, even though they were dirt poor. He inspired his son to lift himself out of their humble experiences, their poor life, and encouraged him to read. He read Arabian Nights to him. He always told his son, question religion, abhor superstition, and go after, just pursue your dream. Unfortunately, his father died when he was 11 years old. He had lived a sheltered life of love, although very poor. His father even saved up enough money to bring him to the theater in town. And that's where he first saw, on stage, people acting, and he knew this is where he wanted to be. His mother remarries in 1818, and he ends up with a stepsister named Karen. Today has a lot of implications. And that support for his creativity and love of education is gone. So like the Little Mermaid, he leaves one world where he is not accepted. He's bullied in school. He has no friends. He can only relate to older adults who appreciate his gentle and artistic nature. So he goes to the big city. He goes to Copenhagen, and he tries ballet, acting. He remains dirt poor. He does have a good soprano voice, so he gets accepted to the Royal Danish Theatre, but then his voice changes. Someone suggests, okay, maybe you should try your hand at poetry. So he begins to write. He meets this man. We need more of this man. This man is a benefactor. He is a benefactor of the Royal Danish Theatre. And he sees talent in this man's writing. He sees talent in his potential to learn. He gets a grant from the king in order to send him to school. So our Hans Christian Andersen gets a second crack at education. He goes to 2 schools, and he ends up looking back on this part of his life as his dark days. He does get an education, but again, he is bullied. And he says that he has to live at his schoolmaster's home, where today we would probably think he was abused. But he says there he was told that any type of punishment given to him was to, quote, improve his character. They discouraged him from writing, but in his depression, which he has depression throughout his life, he writes a story called The Dying Child. So by 1929, he starts writing more and more. He writes a short story with a very long title called A Journey on Foot from Holmes Canal to East Point of Amager, which basically we have a protagonist leaving one world and trying to go to another. And he meets all kinds of characters, from talking cats to St. Peter. But it's kind of like Voltaire, Candide, or Quixote. This is someone on a search, on a quest. He then gets a travel grant from the king. See, it's all about relationships and seeing potential and trusting the artist. And so he starts to travel the world. He will be a lover of travel for the rest of his life. His travels will influence his writing. While in Rome in 1835, he writes The Improvisator, which is a veiled autobiography, and he gets instant acclaim for this autobiography. Then he kicks out another novel 2 years later, more acclaim. And it is only then in the late 1830s where he slowly starts to fall into this magical writing of fairy tales. And by this time, he's already famous. He is already famous. So he could take a chance in writing in a different way. And this is tough to do as someone who is creative. We know when we like an author and they write a certain way, and all of a sudden they start writing differently, we're like, oh my God, did you read that last one that person did? It stunk. I don't like, why is he doing that? Why? But in this case, he took that risk. So in 1837, his first set of fairy tales come out called Wonder Tales. He'll end up writing 9 fairy tales in 3 installments. And the first 61 unbound pages include The Tinderbox, Little Claus and Big Claus, and The Princess and the Pea. So these are all fairy tales that he has heard growing up. But Hans Christian Andersen's writing style brings a magic to what are normal things in life. And this is where his talent is. This is what people love. He makes the ordinary more magical than the magical. This is his talent. You may remember, oh, here's another nice picture of him as he has his fame. These are illustrations from the first set of fairy tales that he did. They're just beautiful. Thumbelina, he wrote Thumbelina, and here's a beautiful cover of Thumbelina. And then it is his third set of tales that include The Little Mermaid and also The Emperor Wears New Clothes. Now he has an international reputation. He has made it. You think the story's over, he's going to go buy an island and just live a charmed, happy life. I looked up, I tried to find the original fairy tale written in Danish, and I was able to find the 2nd edition here on a book. So if anyone is looking for a nice gift for a book lover, I suggest the $61,109 Hans Christian fairy tales. As you can see, these are incredibly precious, precious books. Here's another beautiful picture of him again. Now, like I said, he was famous everywhere. However, not in Denmark. Not in Denmark. In fact, when the first edition came out, he got such negative press in Denmark that he wouldn't write for a whole year. He went into just a deep depression, sit on the couch, watch Netflix and eat Doritos. He was like, he was so hurt. But he does carry on, and he does continue writing. Even in America, there was a magazine that I never heard of, but I think it's like the precursor. Do you remember like Highlights for Children or Ladybug or Cricket? Well, I think before that, there was the Riverside magazine for young people, because I found almost all of them in archive.org, the Internet Archive. And these are beautiful compilations of short stories. And even they were paying him to print his stories. So he's, when I say he was famous, I guess anywhere where he was translated, he was famous. But why wasn't he famous in Denmark? He's a hometown guy. The answer is right here in this beer commercial. Carlsberg, probably the best beer in the world. Well, let me repeat that. Carlsberg, probably the best beer in the world. Can you imagine if Budweiser came out with an ad that said, Bud, probably the best Bud for you? This is not an American ad, okay? This is quintessentially Scandinavian. And now the next time you go by the beer case at Publix or wherever you shop, you are going to understand why Carlsberg is probably the best beer in the world. And you will understand why Hans was not at first accepted. And it is fascinating. I want to introduce you to a term. I'm not going to pronounce it right, but here nor there. It is called Juntlov or Juntloven, Jantelov. Juntlov, laws of Junt, the laws of Junt. These laws were created by a fiction writer in 1933 who wrote about Danish culture, kind of like how George Orwell wrote about 1984, An Animal Farm. So here is a novelist writing about this town called Junt, and there are certain laws in this town. Juntloven is a code of conduct, okay? This is what it is. You are unworthy or you do any inappropriate behavior that is not conforming, you are not a good person, okay? You do not ever do things that are out of the ordinary, and you do not ever show ambition. Not only in Denmark, this is all over Scandinavia. This is a sociological, this is a cultural way of behavior. You do not express individuality or personal success. And this is why the Me Too movement in Scandinavia failed miserably. There was just an article in the New York Times a few months back about this. So what are the 10 rules of Junt? Why Carlsberg cannot be ever the best beer in the world, because they wouldn't buy it. You are not to think you are anything special. You are not to think you are as good as we are. You are not to think you are smarter than we are. You do not imagine yourself better than we are, etc. You're not to laugh at us. You're not to think anyone cares about you. You are not to think you can teach us anything. Anyone in the town of Junt who transgresses this unwritten law are regarded with suspicion and hostility because it goes against the town's communal desire to preserve harmony, social stability, uniformity. But there's another rule. There may be 10 commandments, but there are 11 rules of Junt. And here is the 11th scary rule. Perhaps you think we don't know a thing or two about you. So it's blackmail. It's like you say anything out of the ordinary, and be careful. Be very careful. So this idea encourages supposedly group behavior. In Norway, it is credited for fueling the Nordic countries' high happiness scores. It is to be content with what you have. A humdrum lifestyle is a part of happiness in Scandinavian countries. You think of that recent movement that I can never pronounce it right, HYGGE, this idea we should be happy with a cup of cocoa and a nice vanilla candle and a really cozy comforter, and that's good. But it's also accredited with very high suicide rates. During the Late Show with Stephen Colbert in November of 2018, a Swedish actor that you may know, Alexander Skarsgård, explained that what is it?
Skarsgård.
Okay, thank you. He explained that although he had recently received an Emmy and a Golden Globe Award for a lauded performance, the inhibitions induced by the law of Junt prevented him from boasting about the accolade. In Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, Bourdain and René Redzepi, maybe he's a chef, I don't know, discuss Juntloven's effect on Danish culture. I found this fascinating, and it also explained why Hans' success everywhere else did not, you know, the Denmark was not going to claim him as one of his own because he wasn't behaving well. It was distasteful. It was betrayal. It just didn't sit right. It wasn't until Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales become kind of a norm much later in his life, where all of a sudden they accept him as one of their own. And not only that, we end up with the Little Mermaid being a symbol of Denmark, because they see, I guess, if everyone else likes him, then he's okay. It's kind of the opposite of the circle of trust in Meet the Parents, where we only trust one another. It's like, you know, everyone else has to okay you before we're going to let you in. It just, it definitely explains why Carlsberg is probably the best beer in the world, but it's like poo. We don't want to, you know, God forbid. Okay. If you see images, if you Google Hans Christian Andersen online, you're going to come up with a lot of this image. He had a very good friend named Israel Melchior. The Melchiors were a wonderful friends with Hans Christian Andersen. And this is where he spent the last years of his life outside of Copenhagen at their family home. They took several pictures of him because Israel was a great photographer. And these are the pictures that we see today online. While he was living at their home, not only would he write and read, he also, there's another beautiful picture of him with the family. He also did, you have this version of the book, you'll see several. He also was an artist, and he did these amazing paper cuts that have recently been found and preserved. And in this particular edition, each chapter has these beautiful paper cuts, so ethereal, you know, they could have just fallen apart or been thrown away, but here they are. None of them are about the fairy tales, but they're very melancholy, they're very detailed, and he made them and gave them like as thank you notes and gifts to family and friends, and incredibly delicate. So I had no idea, you know, that he was also an artist, but you can see that they almost remind me of Matisse in a way. They're just really, they're really beautiful. And I have another image that I'll show you a little later on. But I wanted you just to know that, and not only was he a writer, but he was also an artist. In 2012, and in a small town somewhere, I don't know where in Denmark, this family donated a bunch of their family records to the town archive, and they found another Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. There's a wonderful website that unfortunately I couldn't translate to English unless I would just copy and paste into Google Translate, but they have all this information about that. His influence is everywhere. If you're in Central Park, you may have walked by him in The Ugly Duckling. This is in Sydney, at the bridge in Sydney Harbor, because there was a huge Danish population there, and they went ahead and had this sculpture of his bust, another beautiful image of his taken by Melchior. And here is another example of a paper cut that he did. This was to the Melchior family. This was a birthday card. Absolutely gorgeous. People ask about his love life, so I just want to get that out of the way very quickly. Unrequited love with all these individuals. Never worked out with any of these people. The gentleman that you see on the left was Jonas Collins' son. It never worked out. Male, female. He could never, ever find his place. Very much like the Little Mermaid never finds her place with anyone on earth, but hopefully in another place, in another time. This is a from the manuscript from The Little Mermaid. I thought that was fun to see. you know, his handwriting, absolutely beautiful. Okay. I've talked a long time and I apologize for that. Would anyone like to add anything? Did anyone find anything that surprised them in the research? Would you recommend the book? And I also want to know, what did you say when someone said, what are you reading for your book club?
No one asked me.
No, what do you mean no one asked you?
No one asked me.
Did it surprise you, the book?
Yeah,
I figured there was some reason.
Remember it at all.
Oh,
so the ending certainly surprised me.
Of course, I'm always looking for the fairy tale ending, and it was like, what happened? And I guess because of all the Little Mermaid stories and Disney and all that, I was really shocked and sad. I was like, what happened? So anyway, it was a definite surprise ending.
Yeah, it is not happy, but it's very ethereal. Like Lucy, I had to read the ending more than once to really understand what happened. But sometimes it's nice not to have stuff spoon-fed to you. I like sometimes, you know, to have to work for it. And I would also argue, you know, this is a story about immigration. It's a story about finding your own identity. It's a story about making choices about, you know, standing on your own 2 feet, no pun intended, versus, you know, I couldn't help it, who you hang around, who you marry, you know, what are you going to give up? You know, it's Faustian. What are you going to give up? You know, you think about people who pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get get here illegally, or, you know, do things in an underhanded way, but at least, you know.
Well, and those decisions were all made with so little knowledge.
Yeah, it's a vulnerability, taking advantage.
Yeah. I mean, all they knew was of the sea, and to come to land was like, they knew nothing. She knew nothing.
Right.
But it was nice that, you know, this young woman finds her own way. And it's always, you know, the fairy tale is always like, oh, you do everything to marry the prince. You sacrifice, you know, she sacrificed her feet, her voice, and then finally she says, you know, I really don't need all that. I can be who I want to be. So that was kind of a real twist for a fairy tale. And for its time, I think it was pretty, you know, kind of revolutionary thinking.
I think so too. And if you think about how Disney fairy tales are, what is the message to little girls? What is the message? You know,
well, the message has gotten much better lately, because I've seen some of these with my granddaughter now. So the message is much, much better. If you've seen Sing and Sing 2, and is Encanto a Disney or not? If you haven't seen that, it's a
yes, it is.
Well, but wasn't there one where they tried to have a really strong sister, and then, you know, the sort of blind.
Frozen? It was Frozen.
Yeah, and everyone, like all the little girls wanted the beautiful one, and no one bought the toys of the smart, strong one.
Yeah.
Well, Frozen is also based on a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale called The Snow Queen.
Mm-hmm.
So his influence is even. I haven't seen that. I mean, I would say that it'd be interesting, you know, here would be something fun if we all looked at the Disney fairy tales, but read the Disney Snow White and the Disney Cinderella, and then read the Hans Christian Andersen or the Grimm's version and compare and contrast, because I would wager that I'd rather have a little girl watching the older one than the newer one, at least up into the 1950s or 60s, because look, Sleeping Beauty, it's all about getting the prince, and the princes are all, you know, they're all schlubs. They're nudniks. Like, there's nothing going on in here. They're all very handsome, but, you know, they've got some nice real estate, but I mean, and I think that's epitomized in, if you've read The Princess Bride, you know, that's a whole wonderful take on this whole fairy tale thing.
But if you think of the time frame that, you know, a girl had to marry well, or I mean, she couldn't go to get a job or anything. So your whole life was to marry someone with money or someone with respect in the community. A prince is the top, you know. So
well, you're right. So in that case, it is a tale of survival, and this is what you need to do, you know, because you're right.
What was the life of a mermaid if she stayed under the sea?
Well, I don't know, because the mother's AWOL, right? So we have no idea what happened to her. You know, so she's living with her father, and she's living with her grandmother.
I thought she got caught up in nets or something like that. I forget.
Oh, I don't, perhaps, but it's like Hans Christian Andersen, you know, he loses his father and then the mother remarry. I mean, it's, you know, I don't know. It's a good question. And Lucy, I like your idea that, you know, I'm bringing a 2022 sensibility to these older films, but the facts are you had to marry well. You know, you had to, because otherwise, what chance did you have? Particularly in this day and age, may I say, this particular time in May of 2022, being a woman in America, and what are your choices? You know, it's an important story. And so it does go back in a way to sisterhood, you know, depending on one another. It's up to us. You know, we can't, you know, I don't know. I even think, just hold your nose a minute, but I even think Ayn Rand would like this story. Because, you know, I mean, I could argue that in some type of debate, because it's a story of you're going to have to depend on yourself. But at the same time, she did not like children. So I don't know how she would like the afterworld part, but there's a lot.
That's the way he pulled off an ending that rewarded her for her goodness, but not in the conventional way. I mean, you know, I really, you know, thought that was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I guess it was so hard for me, at least, to understand right away, because I wasn't exactly sure what just happened there. Like, what? Wait a minute. Did I miss something? So, yeah. Okay. Well, I invite you all, if you're still interested, we have one more book club in person this season. That's at San Marco Books and More next week, if you'd like to join me there. Otherwise, I wish you a very happy summer. We'll let you know the summer read by the end of the month. And we're hoping also to do, maybe, time permitting, maybe do a get together this summer with a few years ago, we did Z, the story of Zelda Fitzgerald, and we all came in costume, and it was a lot of fun. And Lucy's sister was in town, and she looked very Gatsby Zelda-esque.
We're all flappers.
We were all flappers, and it was a lot of fun. So, you know, hopefully COVID is behind us and we can have some fun. All right, my friends, this has been a pleasure. Lucy, I'm so happy that you came to us in costume.
That is so cool.
Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. I love it.
She sells seashells down by the seashore.
Thank you all. Enjoy your day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.